I wanted to do a video where I covered Frank Warren versus Eddie Hearn, who's winning that war, in a little bit of depth. I'll try and not ramble on for too long, but there's quite a bit I want to cover in this one, so it's got the potential to be a slightly longer one. But I think it's very, very interesting, because a year, maybe 2 years ago, all the momentum was with Eddie Hearn. You had all the big name fighters leaving the Frank Warren stable. You had guys like Nathan Cleverly, Anthony Joshua, Luke Campbell joining Matchroom. There's many, many more than that. James DeGale, George Groves, Ricky Burns, the list goes on. And it really looked to a point where Hearn was creating a pretty monster stable. He was destroying Frank Warren in terms of the fighters he had, the shows he was putting on. And it looked like it was very, very tough times for Frank Warren. What I would say is the momentum can change very, very quickly. And to my eyes, Frank Warren recently has mounted not only just a comeback, but has also possibly been the #1 promoter in Britain. And by that I mean not only end of 2014, but I also mean what the outlook looks like for 2015. So first things first, I'm going to talk about Eddie Hearn, and I'm going to talk about what's going wrong with Eddie Hearn in my opinion, and his fighters, and what his diary's looking like for 2015. I'm then going to sort of look at Frank Warren and what's gone right for him. But first, let's talk Eddie Hearn. I think the first thing to mention is the pay-per-view between Bellew and Cleverly. Not only was the pay-per-view much derided when it was announced, it was quite a disappointing show. The Gale was good, but George Groves was, against a nobody. Anthony Joshua flattened Michael Sprott almost immediately. The main event was not as action-packed as the build-up suggested that it may well be. All in all, that was a disappointing night's boxing in many ways, and I think that reflected badly on the fans who had questioned from the start whether or not it was a genuine pay-per-view occasion. So I think that left a bad taste in the mouth for many fans. If we look at some of the fighters that Eddie Hearn deals with and has under his stable, it's probably not worked out how he would have hoped, and a lot of this is down to really, really terrible luck for Eddie Hearn. It's not that he's done anything wrong. The first two to mention are Kell Brook and Anthony Crolla. Crolla in a world title fight was quite a big deal. And obviously that got taken away due to a sort of terrible, terrible incident where Crolla's next door neighbour was being burgled and he got injured in the occasion. Something similar with Kell Brook. He received a sort of knife wound, and it ruled two Matchroom stars out for a very long period of time, meant inactivity amongst them, and it sort of cancelled big plans. I mean, let's not forget, Kell Brook was originally planned to headline that pay-per-view last year. Crolla versus Abril would have been a very, very big show, and that damaged two of Matchroom's, very, very big nights, in my opinion. So that's not a criticism of Eddie Hearn, it's just a fact. You've got Anthony Joshua, who has pulled out of the January the 31st bill at the O2. Let's not forget, initially that bill was due to be headlined by Carl Frotz and James DeGale, but Joshua Johnson was the headline at the end of the day, and Joshua was pulled out with a back injury. Now the first thing has to be Joshua, who is undoubtedly the future of Matchroom. How bad is this injury? Is it something that could be reoccur throughout his career? Is this something that could be deeply concerning with regards to his progression? Let's hope not. But even if that isn't a problem, we've now got a bill which is headlined by John Ryder against an opponent that I, for one, hadn't heard of, and Kevin Mitchell. This isn't a big glamour bill. This isn't a typical card that you'd expect to see at the O2. Don't get me wrong, there's some decent undercard fights. There's Ricky Boylan, Tyler Gudgeon, John Wayne Hibbard. There's some decent 50-50 undercard matchups for the fans, for the hardcore fans, but there's not that glamour at the top of the bill. John Ryder, Kevin Mitchell, they're not the biggest draws amongst the stable, and I think losing that Joshua Johnson fight is a big blow, both for Joshua's progression and for that particular bill. You've got guys like Carl Frotz, who have been very, very inactive. Had a big year last year, but unclear whether they're even going to fight again. Guys like George Groves, who are part of the stable but have now moved elsewhere. You've got a guy like James DeGale, who in my opinion is the most talented fighter, but his career is currently being delayed and postponed because of the Carl Frotz inactivity situation, and who knows how long he'll have to wait before he actually holds the version of the world title. Then you've got a guy like Ricky Burns, who was a very, very big signing, who's proved very disappointing and has performed consistently below par since making the move. So what I'm saying is I'm not blaming Eddie Hearn. I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm not even saying he's done anything wrong. But there's a combination of circumstances which means that the Matchroom stable haven't created as many memorable nights as they possibly could have done. If Ricky Burns had performed as they hoped when they'd signed him, if Carl Frotz had been a bit more active, if George Groves hadn't gone elsewhere, if James DeGale was, not being delayed, if Joshua wasn't injured, if Brook wasn't injured, if Crawler wasn't injured, if Bellew Cleverly hadn't been such a washout, it's all these things, it's not one thing or the other, but it's building up. And if we look at their programme of events over the next, few weeks and months, you've got the Crawler fight cancelled, you've got the Joshua fight cancelled. Who knows what's happening with Carl Frotz? There's talks of Kell Brook fighting someone no one's even ever heard of in his return fight. It's not looking too rosy for Matchroom at the minute. I'm sure they'll come again because they've got a great stable of fighters, but at the minute it's looking like November 2014 through to about April, May 2015 is quite a disappointing period. That could all be changed. Could Khan Brook be announced? Could a Carl Frotz fight be announced? Could a DeGale fight be announced? There is scope for it to change, but at the minute, I would say that the Matchroom momentum is much less than it was a year ago. Just my opinion. Now, on the other side of the coin, with Frank Warren and Box Nason, times looked pretty bleak for them a year ago. But I must say, Frank's done a pretty fantastic job. He's got a bill coming up where two of his fighters are fighting for the world titles, Derry Matthews and Paul Butler. Now, I know the Derry Matthews fight has come about with quite perverse circumstances with the Crawler injury, which we've already discussed. But, we're talking about a guy here, I think he's lost 9 times, I think he's been stopped 7 times, I think he lost in prize fighter, Derry Matthews. How many times does that profile go on to get a world title? It's great work from Frank Warren to put up the money and to position him accordingly and to make that fight happen. Paul Butler, really exciting talent, really, really spectacular boxer, great performer, and could be a star for many years in the Frank Warren stable. And the fact that he's going to be a 2-time world champion, undefeated fighter at such a young age, really, really exciting times ahead for Paul Butler and Frank Warren there. You've also seen Frank do business with guys who are free agents or are signed with other promoters. Chris Eubank Jr., Tyson Fury. Frank hasn't been afraid of putting on those 50-50 matchup. Eubank Jr. versus Billy Joe Saunders was a superb fight. Fury versus Chisora as well. Skeet versus Gavin, Walsh versus Sykes. And, there's more of that to come. There really is more of that to come. If you look at, there's talk about Billy Joe fighting Nick Blackwell. That's a good fight. You've obviously got Billy Joe fighting Andy Lee in the future, assuming Andy Lee comes through his fight against Patrick Nielsen, I believe. Eddie Chambers versus Alexander Ustinov on February the 28th. Tyson Fury, Christian Hammer. These are really nice matchups. These are good fights. These are fights that I'm very much looking forward to seeing, and they certainly represent more attractive fights to my eyes than the fights that are coming out of Matchroom right now. if we look at the future for the Frank Warren stable, if he can keep hold of Tyson Fury and keep him on Box Nason, if he can do that with Tyson Fury, Eubank Jr., Paul Butler and Billy Joe Saunders, there is a real big future ahead for that team. You know, Billy Joe Saunders versus Andy Lee is going to be a massive event in the summer. That's going to be a huge fight. Tyson Fury versus Vladimir Klitschko, that will be mandated towards the end of the year. You know, that's going to be a huge fight. I think Billy Joe beats Andy Lee. Imagine Billy Joe versus Chris Eubank, maybe next summer, rematch. I mean, the momentum's there. Frank's not afraid to put the money up. He's not afraid to create these 50-50 fights. And to my eyes, despite the fact that Eddie Hearn initially did a good job of, of taking a few fighters away from Frank, I think more recently Warren's done a really good job of bringing in some star power to his channel and to Box Nation with the likes of Fury and Eubank Jr. as well. He's adapted, he's evolved, and he's doing really well at the minute. The final thing I'd say, and I know I'm a bit of a Billy Joe Saunders fanboy, I like to rant on about him quite a bit, but I must say the job that Frank Warren has done building Billy Joe Saunders is absolutely second to none in my opinion. Like, you look at a guy like Chris Eubank Jr. who's promoted elsewhere, and you see he's got a padded record, he fights guys a couple of weight classes below, you know, he fights guys with 20 losses on their records. Well, Billy Joe, you know, so many tough fights. Frank Warren gambled, Frank Warren backed him, you know, Frank Warren put up the money to get in big undefeated opponents, Blanda Mura, Spike O'Sullivan, John Ryder, Nick Blackwell, Chris Eubank Jr., possibly Nick Blackwell again. You know, he really gave him a good education, British title, Commonwealth title, European title. And Billy Joe has time and time again gone the distance, experienced tough fights, and because of that he's now ready for the big fights in my opinion. I think fantastic job to be done. The future is really bright. Billy Joe and Tyson Fury both fighting for world titles on Box Nation. Maybe even throwing Chris Eubank Jr. Obviously Derry Matthews and Paul Butler fighting for world titles. It really is a exciting time for Box Nation and for Frank Warren. And yeah, I think at present, in my opinion, Frank is winning the war. Let me know your thoughts on this. I'm interested to discuss it further. Thanks for watching.